under the soft glow of dawn, the air in the coastal apartment was heavy with silence, too heavy for a place that once pulsed with life. Dylan's confession to Electra the night before had torn open a wound neither of them knew how to heal. She had watched him tremble, his eyes clouded by guilt, as he admitted that he was the one who stabbed Luna during the chaos at the beach. For a moment, Electra couldn't breathe. The sound of the waves outside, once a lullaby to their shared youth, now echoed like the rhythmic beat of judgment. The words had come out broken, half-choked by tears, and yet their meaning was sharp enough to cut through the last remnants of her sanity. Luna had been their anchor, the soul that tied them together, and now that anchor had been drowned by Dylan's trembling hands. When Electra left that night, she wandered aimlessly through the empty streets. Neon lights bled into the puddles at her feet, distorting her reflection until she no longer recognized herself. Every memory of Luna, her laughter, her dreams, her warmth, played on a loop in her mind, colliding violently with the image of Dylan's tear-stained face. She wanted to forgive him, to understand the madness that had driven him to that point, but another part of her, a darker, quieter part, whispered that forgiveness was nothing more than surrender. By dawn, her hands were shaking so hard that she didn't notice the small cuts appearing on her skin, or the faint metallic scent that clung to her nails. The next day, when Dylan's body was discovered, the entire town recoiled. His death wasn't just violent, it was ritualistic. The small apartment was in disarray, furniture overturned, glass shattered, but what struck the investigators most was the precision. Every bruise, every broken bone, every wound seemed deliberate, as if whoever had done this wanted to erase not just Dylan's life, but his very existence. The scene spoke of rage, but also of purpose. The police called it an act of revenge. The public called it justice. Electra called it fate. From the beginning, nothing about the case made sense. The security cameras outside Dylan's building had been disabled an hour before his death. The neighbors swore they'd heard nothing unusual, yet there were fresh footprints in the alleyway, too small to belong to a man. A single glove, smeared with blood, was found near the back exit, but DNA tests came back inconclusive. Forensics suggested a stranger's presence, yet no witness could place anyone near the scene. Dylan's phone was found crushed under his body, as if someone wanted to silence the last thing he might have said. To the outside world, it was the work of a vengeful stranger avenging Luna's murder. But deep down, Electra felt something gnawing at her, something that made her nights longer and her days blur into one another. At first, Electra seemed like a victim too. The grief that followed Dylan's death was unbearable. Friends came and went, offering sympathy and half-hearted comfort. She stared through them all, her mind trapped between the memory of Dylan's trembling confession and the violent way he had been found. There were moments, small, fleeting ones, when she would lose track of time. She'd wake up to find scratches on her arms or dirt under her fingernails. Once, she discovered her jacket crumpled at the bottom of the closet, stiff with dried blood. She told herself it wasn't hers. She told herself she was just falling apart. But the mirror told another story. The face looking back at her was changing. As the investigation dragged on, rumors began to spread. Someone whispered that Luna had a child hidden somewhere, a baby born in secret before that tragic night by the sea. Others claimed that Dylan had killed Luna to protect someone powerful, that her death had been part of a larger scheme. Yet, the most haunting rumor of all was about the Avenger, a figure in the shadows who punished anyone responsible for Luna's pain. Some said the Avenger was a ghost. Some said it was Luna's own spirit returned for vengeance. But for Electra, those stories hit too close to home. She began receiving strange phone calls, no voice, only the sound of waves crashing. Envelopes appeared at her doorstep with no return address, containing newspaper clippings of Luna's death. Sometimes, she thought she heard Luna's voice calling her name when she was half asleep. Electra started seeing a therapist after she fainted during one of Luna's memorials. The sessions unearthed memories she didn't know she had, visions of the beach, flashes of blood on her hands, Dylan's face twisted in terror, and the unmistakable sound of a scream that didn't belong to either of them. The doctor spoke of trauma-induced dissociation, of repressed guilt and fractured memory. But the more she tried to remember, the more the pieces refused to fit together. Some nights, she would sit up in bed and find herself talking to an empty chair as if Luna were sitting there. Other times, she'd find messages on her phone written in her own handwriting but with words she didn't recall typing. Justice is coming. The police eventually ruled Dylan's death a revenge killing, but they never found the culprit. Forensic inconsistencies piled up, DNA mismatches, time discrepancies, and missing evidence. The detective in charge noted something peculiar: the way the crime scene mirrored Luna's own murder, down to the angle of the wounds. It was as if someone had reenacted her death blow for blow. Yet there was no proof. No one could connect Electra to it, though her alibi had holes large enough to drive a storm through. She said she had been at home that night, but her phone's GPS placed her near the coast, just miles from Dylan's apartment. When asked, she couldn't explain why. Weeks later, as the gossip surrounding Dylan's murder began to fade, Electra moved out of her apartment. She told her friends she needed distance from the city, that every street corner reminded her of Luna. But in truth, she was running from the gaps in her memory, from the whispers that followed her, and from the strange bank transfers that kept showing up under her name. Money sent every month to a woman in another town, a foster mother with no records, no identification, and no connection to anyone in Luna's life. When Electra confronted her own financial statements, she froze. The transactions were hers, the signature hers too. Yet she had no recollection of making them. The recipient's address led to an isolated farmhouse near the woods, and though she told herself she'd never go there, she found herself driving there one evening without knowing why. The farmhouse was quiet, surrounded by fog and silence. A woman with tired eyes opened the door, holding a baby in her arms. The child couldn't have been older than a year. The woman didn't ask Electra who she was, she simply said, "He's been waiting for you," and handed her the baby. Electra stood frozen, heart pounding, unable to speak. The baby's eyes, dark and unblinking, looked exactly like Luna's. That night, when she returned home, she couldn't remember the drive back. The next morning, the baby was gone, as if he had never existed. People in town began to notice Electra's growing instability. She was seen wandering near the cliffs, speaking softly to herself, sometimes clutching Luna's old bracelet. The whispers returned, louder this time, that Electra knew more than she admitted, that perhaps she had been Luna's killer all along, or Dylan's, or both. Yet no one dared confront her. There was something in her eyes, something wild and untamed, something that belonged neither to grief nor guilt, but to a haunting that lived deep inside her. Eventually, the truth, or what passed for it, began to unravel in fragments. A recovered surveillance clip showed Electra entering Dylan's building the night he died. Her hands were wrapped in gloves. She appeared calm, almost mechanical, as she climbed the stairs. 30 minutes later, she left, her jacket zipped to the neck, her face unreadable. Experts argued that she might have been in a dissociative fugue, a state where her conscious mind had split, allowing another personality to take control. That other self, the one consumed by vengeance, had avenged Luna's death, without Electra ever realizing it. The police closed the case, ruling it as unsolvable, but to the audience, the truth was painfully clear. The real killer and the victim were one and the same. Electra's decline became a quiet tragedy. She isolated herself completely, leaving behind her friends, her job, and even her name. Some say she checked into a mental health facility under an alias. Others believe she still roams the coastal town at night, drawn by the sound of the sea that started it all. And the rumors, those never stopped. There are still whispers of a woman paying hush money to a caretaker outside the city, ensuring that a child with Luna's eyes grows up far from the darkness that birthed him. In the end, Electra became both myth and warning, a woman split by grief, punished by the ghosts of her own making. The sea that once washed away her sorrow now roared with accusation, as if Luna herself were still calling out from beneath the waves. Whether the baby existed or not, whether the Avenger still lingered in her fractured mind, no one could say. All that remained was a story etched in blood and silence, that sometimes justice isn't delivered by the living, but by the broken pieces of a soul that refuses to die. It began with whispers, soft, uncertain murmurs that spread like cracks through the fragile calm of the town. Someone had seen a man outside the hospital, standing near the emergency exit where the security lights flickered weakly. His face was obscured beneath the brim of a cap, but his posture, his gait, the unmistakable slant of his shoulders, they stirred a collective memory. Those who had known Luna, Dylan, and the tangled web of lives they'd left behind could swear it was someone they had seen before. The curve of his hair in the dim light, the rhythm of his steps, the stillness in his stance, all too familiar. And when someone finally spoke his name in a trembling voice, it was enough to ignite a new wave of dread. RJ. No one could explain why he was back, or if he had ever truly left. He had vanished from their lives months before Luna's death, drifting into silence after a series of violent altercations that were quietly buried by those who feared what he might become. RJ had been close to all of them once, Luna's confidant, Dylan's rival, and Elektra's unspoken obsession. His presence had always carried an unease that others felt but never named. Now, as he appeared around the hospital and the apartment complex where Dylan had been murdered, that unease returned with a vengeance. Witnesses described him standing in the rain, staring up at Dylan's building for hours, motionless except for the faint twitch of his fingers, as if counting something only he could see. The night before Dylan's death, there had been a secret meeting, one that was never meant to come to light. Dylan had summoned RJ to a secluded cafe near the waterfront, perhaps in a desperate attempt to cleanse his conscience. What was said during that conversation would remain buried beneath waves of fear and rumor, but fragments emerged through half-remembered security footage and a single recovered text message. It wasn't supposed to happen. She ran into me. You were right about her. Those words would haunt every investigator who read them, for they hinted not only at guilt but at complicity. When Dylan's body was found, the brutality of the scene sent shockwaves through everyone who saw it. The violence wasn't random, it was artfully orchestrated, a macabre marked signature that echoed the precision of an executioner. Each broken fingernail seemed symbolic, each bruise a deliberate message. His phone was missing, his digital footprint erased, as though the killer wanted to strip him of identity before taking his life. The pattern of the attack bore eerie resemblance to an unsolved string of assaults years earlier, crimes associated with a mysterious figure known only in police files as the Architect. Those cases had stopped abruptly when RJ disappeared. Now, they seemed to have resumed. As rumors spread, the walls of the hospital began to close in around Elektra, who was already unraveling under the weight of her shattered psyche. She had checked herself into the psychiatric ward days after Dylan's funeral, her mind fractured between guilt and hallucination. But even within those sterile white corridors, she felt watched. Nurses reported seeing a man lingering in the courtyard during visiting hours, wearing a hood, his face hidden but his eyes fixed on Elektra's window. Security footage later confirmed his presence. And once again, the build, the movement, the tilt of the head matched RJ perfectly. It was during this time that the police stumbled upon a chilling discovery. A coded note had been slipped into Dylan's apartment weeks before his death, written on thin stationery that smelled faintly of seawater. It read, "An eye for an eye, a soul for a soul. You took from the ocean, now the ocean takes you." Forensic analysis found traces of salt residue and sand consistent with the coastal cliffs where Luna's body had been discovered. Whoever left that note had an intimate understanding of both victims and their sins. But what truly reignited the town's fear was the reemergence of a name that had long been buried, Luna's child. The rumor had resurfaced with new strength, that Luna hadn't died alone, that she'd given birth shortly before the night of her murder, and that someone, perhaps her killer, had taken the baby. The whispers deepened when a social worker from a nearby town came forward, claiming she'd been contacted months ago by a woman offering large sums of money to keep a newborn, off the record. The caller had used a distorted voice, and the funds were traced to a shell account under multiple aliases. But one pattern stood out. Every transaction was linked, in some form, to an offshore foundation registered in RJ's name. Suddenly, everything shifted. The mysterious figure outside the hospital wasn't just a haunting presence, it was a thread leading back to the heart of the storm. Theories multiplied. Some said RJ had killed Dylan to silence him, to protect the secret of Luna's child. Others believed he was the Avenger, punishing Dylan for what he had done to Luna. But there were darker possibilities, that Luna's child was not hidden for safety, but for control. That the child represented something more, a legacy of guilt, a pawn in an unending cycle of vengeance that RJ had vowed to sustain. As the investigation deepened, Elektra's mental state worsened. Her episodes of amnesia grew longer, her perception more distorted. She began to see Luna's reflection in every mirror, to hear her voice in the hum of hospital machines. But what terrified her most were the moments when she couldn't tell if she was hearing Luna or RJ. Sometimes, in her dreams, she would see them together on the beach, standing over her, their faces half lit by the moon. Luna would reach out with bloodied hands, and RJ would whisper, "You finished what I started." Outside the hospital, events turned even more sinister. One nurse, returning to her car after a late shift, found a small music box on the hood. It played a lullaby, the same melody Luna used to hum to calm her nerves during long nights at the bar. Inside the box was a photograph, Luna, smiling faintly, holding a baby wrapped in a blue blanket. On the back, written in ink barely legible from smudges, were the words, "He's not gone. She promised." That photograph changed everything. The authorities reopened the Luna case, this time focusing not on who killed her, but on who had taken the child afterward. The trail led them to a rundown property outside the city limits, a place locals referred to as the Nest. It had once been a fisherman's hut, but now it was fortified, its windows sealed, and its door reinforced with metal bars. When police finally broke in, they found traces of a life once lived, bottles of baby formula, tiny clothes folded neatly in drawers, and a stack of letters addressed to L. None of them were signed, but the handwriting matched RJ's. Yet even with these revelations, nothing could explain the depth of Elektra's connection to it all. She insisted she knew nothing about the child, that she'd never been there, never seen RJ. But the evidence told a different story. Her fingerprints were found on one of the bottles. Her blood, faint but traceable, was on the crib's edge. And beneath the floorboards, wrapped in plastic, was a lock of hair belonging to Luna, cut cleanly, preserved like a relic. The discovery turned the town against itself. Was Elektra a victim of manipulation, or had RJ used her fractured mind as a vessel for his revenge? Witnesses began reporting sightings of them together, on dark roads, near the cliffs, by the sea where Luna had died. Yet each sighting contradicted the others, as though the pair were shadows of one another, appearing and vanishing at will. In the final days before winter, a new video surfaced, grainy footage from a gas station near the highway. It showed RJ holding a child, perhaps a year old, his expression calm, almost tender. He looked directly into the camera before turning away, disappearing into the storm. The timestamp on the footage matched the exact moment Elektra had another blackout episode in the hospital. When she regained consciousness, her hands were shaking, her fingernails cracked. She whispered one thing over and over to the nurse who found her. He took him home. What home meant, no one knew. Some believe RJ fled overseas, raising Luna's child under a false name. Others think he never left, that he still hides among them, watching, waiting. But those who have looked into Elektra's eyes since say they've seen something else, something that doesn't belong entirely to her. A fragment of Luna's spirit, perhaps, or RJ's influence lingering within. Now, the town exists in a fragile state of suspension, haunted by the sense that the story isn't over. Every sound of the tide feels like a whisper from the past, every shadow in the hospital corridor a reminder of the ghosts still walking among the living. And somewhere out there, a child with Luna's eyes and RJ's quiet defiance grows older, unaware of the legacy of blood that brought him into the world. Whether he is meant to end the cycle or begin it anew, no one can say. But one truth remains unshaken: the sins of the ocean never stay buried for long.